Greetings and welcome to our third and final essay on what has become known in politics and finance as the big lie. Part 1 explained how it works. Part 2 described its effects in both social and financial turmoil. And in this concluding piece, we chunk up, escape the gravitational pull of its jargon industry, especially their troll factories, and situate the whole process in history. If we can spot its coming and going over time, like a tide ebbing and flowing throughout history, we just might do a better job of navigating its risks and limitations. The first step in that process is to, at least occasionally, step up and outside the shenanigans of partisan, vested, and even regional bias. So let's take a fresh look. A timely decision as much of the world stumbles towards turmoil and revolt. Let's risk oversimplifying things a bit, even stretching a metaphor or two, not to deceive ourselves, but rather just to make sure we're using common words accurately and consistently. We so rarely stop to remember the difference between words and the reality to which they refer. When a building is on fire, for example, screaming the word water at it, even at the top of our lungs, won't lower the temperature one damn bit. Instead, it takes a hose or a bucket filled with the actual stuff the word water refers to. That's what people mean when they say that maps are not the territory. It's true, but used carefully, words can help us understand each other. We only have to be careful to use them with the same meaning. So let's begin our climb up and out of the rhetorical weeds of the lies of our generation by examining a key feature of real life all around us. Nearly every day we watch or listen to the news, and we see reporters bravely voice their scripts from behind an impenetrable veil of gobbledygook about cycles. Growth cycles, inflation cycles, tightening cycles, easing cycles, secular cycles, macro cycles. Almost universally missing from these discussions, however, is any mention of the time over which these cycles apply. They rarely tell us exactly when conditions might climb or fall or change direction or improve or slow down. Truth is, they're bluffing. They haven't a clue. Let's begin, therefore, with a proper description of cycles per se, including their time frames and the specific aspects of life to which they apply. Biologists make it easier for us by dividing most cycles into 4 chunks or quadrants. By general convention, in both mapping and mathematics, at least under what southpaws humorously call the tyranny of the right-handed world, movement to the right means bigger. And as you might expect, movement to the left means smaller. A companion part of this same convention holds that upward movement means speeding up. And again, as you might expect, movement down means just that, slowing down. In fact, these 4 forces become even more interesting when they're combined. For example, this one is indicating to the right and up, which means it's not only growing, but it's growing faster and faster. In other words, it's also accelerating. For convenience, Such combinations are often, combined. And if we're discussing cycles rather than just lines, the vector is often represented as an arc, which gives us a pretty powerful shorthand way of describing the changes occurring during each phase of any cycle. This first one, for example, tells us that something's not only growing, since it's moving to the right, but that whatever change is occurring is also accelerating, since it's also moving upwards. Whereas this sector is a little trickier. The change is still accelerating, since it's moving upwards, but the growth itself is actually slowing, since it's now moving left. The sequence will become clearer as we progress. In this next sector, the direction is now changed to the left. It's no longer just a matter of growth slowing, like it was in the second sector. The direction in this third sector is to the left, meaning the underlying item is actually shrinking. And to keep things a bit more realistic, the direction has also switched from upward to downward. It's still in the upper half, indicating that while the acceleration is weakening, it is still acceleration. So be careful. Pause and take your time here. Notice that it's still in the upper half, so it hasn't actually begun to decelerate yet. It's still accelerating, only that the acceleration is weakening. Now here, finally, we get both vectors unwinding. Being on the left means the item is actually shrinking, not just growing more slowly, and being below the center line means the item is actually decelerating. It's actually slowing down. Which brings us to the point where we can finally apply these ideas to practical reality, and even to the giant cycles of finance, politics, and history. We're about to discover where we are, where we really are, in the overall flow of things, not just in some jargon junkie's advertising campaign or some political liar's fundraising cycle. The best first place to start our model is with biological cycles, because they arise from hard physical reality and we can test them for ourselves. It's pretty hard for crooks and fibbers to move the moon a week ahead or swap spring and fall this year to pick our pockets or manipulate our beliefs. So let's start with the first quarter of the first cycle of a typical living being. It's called germination. At this stage, a little seed hasn't a clue what to expect yet. She just bursts out of the ground, breathes, eats, and drinks, and stumbles blithely into the future, wondering what her mission will be. Round about the end of the first quarter or the beginning of the second, she experiences a huge revelation and learns exactly which kind of plant she's meant to become. From that moment on, she no longer flounders aimlessly as a joyful, careless sapling, but rather begins growing deliberately towards her destiny. She grows steadily and specifically toward the specific species of tree she's meant to become. By the end of the second quarter and the beginning of the third, she reaches mature treedom, manifests her destiny, and begins distributing the fruits of all the growing and structuring she achieved during the first 2 quarters. Finally, in the fourth quarter, she begins to dissolve the structures that arose to support her mission and breaks them down for reabsorption into a soil capable of sowing new seeds for the next cycle. In much the same way, our universe galaxies, our galaxy planets. We live on a planet that has the odd property of peopling. Just as our tree-appled planet Earth peoples. And as with all biologicals, we experience much the same cycle phases or quadrants as other living systems, with one fascinating difference. Most humans have the opportunity to live through the cycle 3 times in a single lifespan, with each cycle taking approximately 30 years, and with each cycle having its own distinctive character and mission. One easy analogy for describing the difference between the cycles is to imagine what we'd say about ourselves if we happened to die during that cycle. For example, the first cycle, from birth until about 29 and a half years old, would be remembered for what was done to us. Who parented us? Which school taught us? What religion formed our beliefs? Which company employed us? Etc. The second cycle, between 30 and 60, is more about what you do. Whose parent are you? What school did you teach at? What company did you create, and which employees did you supervise? Until finally, in the third cycle, roughly between 60 and 90, all the old roles gradually lessen or even disappear, leaving us to discover who's left. Who are we really, beyond the roles we played? Child, parent, student, teacher, employee, owner, retiree, pensioner, volunteer, hobbyist, traveler, tourist. Who are we really as we step into pure presence, into wordless awareness? Which leaves us with one particular element for us humans. We are somewhat unique among creatures in being aware of the fourth quarter and conscious of the dissolution and unwinding of the structures of the preceding cycle. This first dissolution happens to us when we approach 29 years old. Our second dissolution happens to us as we approach 59 years old, which folk culture sometimes describes as a second childhood or a midlife crisis, but that's due to the adolescent behaviors that often repeat at this stage in what is actually a mistaken idea, stemming from the false time frame of earlier generations who suffered much shorter lifespans. The truth is much simpler. We actually go through a fourth quarter in every cycle. By its very nature, as a dissolution, as a coming apart of familiar structures that have stood us in good stead for 3 previous quarters, it can understandably be a disconcerting, even painful period. But there's a relatively easy palliative to this upset. Upon further examination, we quickly find the pain comes from looking back over our shoulder and obsessing over why previous structures are dissembling. Whereas the pain vanishes almost immediately if we just turn 180 degrees forward to ask, how are these present circumstances grooming me and preparing the soil to receive a new seed at the bottom and begin the next cycle? In fact, if you'd like to backtest this entire model, I challenge you to ask a few friends and acquaintances what was happening in their lives at approximately 29 and a half years old. You will be astonished at the number of responses along the lines of, "Oh, I changed jobs then," or "I switched careers," or "I outgrew my family's religion," or my family-approved or neighborhood marriage partner and I split up and went our separate ways. Which leads us to the question that should be niggling at you by now, after this considerable side trip. What's all this got to do with the big lie? And especially, how does it relate to investing strategies that might protect us from the big lie? At the very beginning of this essay, we noted how financial jargon industry people hide their own confusion about cycles behind a flood of gobbledygook that almost universally avoids any mention of the time frame over which they apply. How many times have you seen a mainstream financial press pundit wax eloquent before a chart like this one and make absolutely no sense at all? No matter how carefully you attend to every word, you come away with no more idea of when things will happen than you had going in. For all their pontificating, and despite using all the words, they have no idea how this stuff actually works. When trades temporarily turn against ranges, or ranges move counter-trend, or trends go against the current quad, or quadrants temporarily defy cycles, they turn into blathering, bluffing idiots spewing nonsense, because their fees depend on filling dead air, not on verifiable investment results. There must not be a genuine sailor among them. They seem categorically oblivious to how wavelets can run up the side of a crashing wave, or how waves can run against an incoming tide, or how powerful winds can shift with or against those same waves, equally with or against that same tide. Yet you and I can see those phenomena so clearly, simply because we don't have biased narratives or clueless jargon hucksters squawking sales pitches in our ear. Instead, we're free to see the waves are just waves, damn it. Yes, they each have a gazillion smaller wavelets swirling around atop them, but they're an unmitigated delight to watch and marvel at if you can just clear your mind of the flotsam the big lie liars want you to believe. See those wavelets behind the wave crest? Here's what they look like up close. Not so scary now, are they? Their time frames are measured in seconds. Do the waves look fearsome at the moment of crashing on shore, releasing all that pent-up energy to restore calm? Of course they do. Their time frames are measured in minutes. And for all the fury in mid-channel eddies at mid-tide, do you have any trouble marveling at the slack water peace and calm at low tide or high tide? Their time frames are measured in hours, and their neap and spring extremes are measured in weeks and months. And if you're interested in time frames somewhere between the Big Bang and a star going nova, may we offer you a few eras? Periods? How about ages? Or centuries? And if you have the attendant curiosity of a good amateur historian, may I suggest a smattering of Peter Turchin's Times, Neil Howe's Turnings, Jem Carsan's Medians and Means, or even Teilhard de Chardin's Noospheric Spirals. It's time to bring our attention up to date. Where are we in the current cycle? What might be the modern version of idolatry? Bibliologists quote the Apocalypse. But nuance suggests Neil Howe's fourth turning might be the better option. There's certainly no lack of corresponding indicators. Some of our neighbors are old enough to have seen it all before. It seems so obvious to them. Come the next big storm, the pretense will finally become obvious to everyone, and we'll finally awaken, surprised perhaps, to see the elite for who they really are. Ordinary people for the most part, and for the most part blind to the big picture just like everyone else. We will finally understand why banksters were so terrified of the prophecy screaming at them from Bitcoin's very existence. The single idea expressed in its white paper in 2009, before anyone had even tried to actually implement it, screamed the unvarnished truth about the big lie. It exposed the liars in every language in a manner they could no longer cover up as the fourth quarter of dissolution crept across all continents simultaneously. The time is coming when we will ask what resistance traders did to avoid being sucked into the oblivion of lost savings, collapsing pension funds, deteriorating currencies, and essential scarcity. Resistance traders seem to be able to break free of the gargantuan jargon industry's vicious grasp, just when most investors are being body-slammed by the mainstream financial industry. Private resistance traders ignore their dogma and their vested interests, and instead toggle away to simple, almost naive, sensory-based signals that save them from dreadful drawdowns. Ironically, the answers are available at absolutely no cost in videos similar to this one for internauts who bother to look for them. You can even begin with the instructional series of videos on this same site, detailing what some resistance traders call the M33 process. This concludes this third essay in our series on the big lie and the bigger lie. I hope it's been helpful to you. I've enjoyed doing it. And I do recommend that you have a look at the M33 series on how to trade the world's markets in keeping with and understanding and aware of the big lie going on in the background. Bye for now.